You ever notice something strange? The smarter you are, the lonelier it gets. Not because you're difficult, not because you're wrong, but because the world isn't built for minds like yours, and nobody wants to admit it. Socrates was sentenced to death for asking too many questions. Tesla died broke and alone, even though his ideas powered the modern world. Alan Turing cracked the code that helped end World War II, and society thanked him by destroying his life. Starting to see the pattern? Now let me ask you something real. Have you ever felt like the deeper you think, the less people hear you? Like the more you understand, the more invisible you become? It's not just in your head. And what if I told you society is designed to keep people like you quiet? We'll come back to that. But first, let's talk about why your mind scares them. You ever try to share something real with people, something meaningful, and the room just goes silent? It's like the moment you drift into depth, everyone else checks out. You bring up a big idea, something you've been thinking about for days, and they change the subject to sports, gossip, or whatever's trending. You're not too intense, you're not too much, you're just surrounded by people who stopped thinking a long time ago. Now pause. Think about that. What if being misunderstood isn't your failure, but proof that you're ahead of your time? Because let's be honest, you've probably started to wonder if you're the problem. Why do they laugh when you're serious? Why does it feel like every deep conversation gets shut down before it even begins? I'll tell you why. Because thinking deeply in today's world is like whispering in a stadium. No one wants to hear it, not because it's wrong, but because it makes them uncomfortable. And I need you to hear this clearly. You're simply awake in a world that desperately wants to stay asleep. And that right there is where loneliness begins. Here's something most people will never admit. Smart people don't have to say anything to make others uncomfortable. They just have to be there. And it's not because you're loud or trying to prove a point. It's because your presence reflects what others are trying to ignore. Intelligent people are mirrors, not megaphones. You don't shout, you reveal. And that's what scares them. Think about it. Someone walks in with insane muscles. They're admired. Someone's dripping with money. Envy maybe, but still admired. But someone walks in and they're clearly sharper than everyone else. Now it gets awkward. Because unlike muscles or money, intelligence hits closer to the bone. Here's why. People define themselves by how they think. So when you walk in and think better, deeper, faster, it doesn't just challenge their opinions, it challenges who they believe they are. And Schopenhauer, brutal but brilliant, nailed it. Intellect reflects what others want to avoid. Most people don't want to face their own limits. And when they're around you, they don't have a choice. Here's the truth. Bomb most can't handle. People don't hate deep thinkers because they're wrong. They hate them because they're right too early. And that makes them dangerous. You've probably noticed this already. Strength. People admire it. Beauty. They praise it. Wealth. They chase it, follow it, worship it. But intelligence? That gets side eyes. That gets silence. That gets resistance. And the question is, why? Here's where it gets weird. Intelligence doesn't even need to say a word to feel threatening. You can walk into a room, sit down, say nothing, and still make people uncomfortable. Because strength, beauty, wealth, those are external. They don't challenge who someone believes they are on the inside. But intelligence? That cuts deeper. Because we define ourselves by our thoughts, what we believe, what we think we know. So when someone shows up thinking on another level, it's not just impressive, it's disruptive. It doesn't just challenge their ideas, it challenges their identity. And most people, they'll protect their identity at all costs, even if it means rejecting the one person in the room who actually gets it. Let's get into the science for a second. Not just opinions, but what your brain is actually doing. When someone feels intellectually outmatched, even slightly, their amygdala, the brain's fear center, lights up. Yeah. Being around someone smarter literally triggers the same part of the brain that responds to physical danger. It's not just insecurity, it's survival instinct. And it gets worse in group settings. One-on-one, maybe they can manage it. But when other people are watching, the pressure to keep up goes through the roof, because now it's not just about feeling dumb, it's about looking dumb. And that's when people start to shut down, change the subject, or quietly push you out. Why? Because the brain is doing what it's wired to do, protect the ego. And here's what makes it messy. We're all carrying cognitive biases that make this reaction even stronger, the Dunning-Kruger effect. That's when the least competent people think they're the smartest in the room. The backfire effect? That's when you prove someone wrong, and instead of changing, they double down on their belief. And the status quo bias? That's the brain's addiction to familiar ideas, even if they're false. So if you're someone who questions things, sees deeper, or challenges the obvious, you're not just unwelcome. You're a threat to their mental stability. People don't resist you, they resist the discomfort you represent. And here's where it flips. If you think deep thinkers are just unlucky loners, wait until you see how systems are built to keep them powerless. History doesn't lie, but it also doesn't tell the whole story. Let's run through some names. You've heard of them, but not like this. Socrates didn't just teach philosophy. He challenged people to think for themselves. The reward? He was executed for corrupting minds. Galileo discovered that Earth revolves around the sun. You'd think we'd thank him. Instead, silenced, forced to deny his truth to stay alive. Nikola Tesla, the mind behind wireless energy and so much more, died broke, alone, while others cashed in on his ideas. Hypatia, a brilliant woman in a world run by men, philosopher, astronomer, teacher. And for that, brutally murdered by a mob. Her crime, thinking too far ahead. But nobody tells you this part. Most of these minds were hated while they were changing the world. Because genius isn't feared for being wrong, it's feared for being right before everyone else is ready. That's the pattern. Breakthrough minds are rarely celebrated when they're alive. They're resisted, ridiculed, erased. And only once they're gone, only once they're no longer a threat, then they're honored. Because that's when it's safe. Because genius is only celebrated when it's no longer threatening. You ever wonder why it's so hard to enjoy the things other people seem to love so easily? Like, you're sitting in a room full of people laughing at something shallow. And all you can think is this really it? Schopenhauer put it perfectly. The smarter you are, the harder it is to enjoy simple things. Most people, they're wired by what he called the will to pleasure. They chase ease, comfort, distraction. But you run on something different. You run on the will to truth. You're not here to be pacified, you're here to understand. And that creates a kind of split you can't unsee. They want comfort. You want clarity. They want to stay warm in illusion. You're willing to face the cold, if it means facing reality. And here's the twist. Here's that one line nobody says out loud. Intelligence isn't scary because it's superior. It's scary because it reveals how insecure everyone else is. Think about that. You don't have to brag. You don't have to flaunt anything. Your presence, your questions, your depth, it holds up a mirror. And most people, they spend their whole lives avoiding mirrors. That's why the deeper you go, the more people pull away. Not because you're wrong, but because you see what they're not ready to look at. If this is hitting home, like the video and tap subscribe, it helps get this message to someone who needs it. Now here's the part that stings a little. In the past, deep thinkers were ignored. Today, they're buried under noise, trends, and endless scrolling. Open any social platform. What goes viral? Not depth, not insight, memes over meaning, fast, loud, shallow. That's what wins now, because complexity doesn't get clicks, simplicity does. And that's the reason this video might not go viral. And workplaces? They're no different. They don't say, "You're too smart." They say, "You're not a culture fit." Translation? You make people uncomfortable by thinking too hard. The unspoken rule is simple. Don't challenge. Don't question. Smile, nod, keep the system running. And the moment you don't, you're the problem. Now let's not ignore this next piece because it hits even harder. Smart women get told to smile more. Smart men get told they're too intense. In other words, don't just tone down your ideas, tone yourself down, and this is where we need to drop a truth bomb. Society doesn't want you to think deeply, it wants you to think conveniently. Deep thought disrupts comfort. It slows down systems built on automation, obedience, and speed. So if you've ever felt out of place for thinking more, that's not a glitch in the system. That is the system. Isn't it strange? The world builds statues of people it once burned at the stake, not because they changed their minds, but because time made the truth less threatening. When someone challenges the way things are, in real time, they're dangerous. But once they're gone, once their truth is no longer disruptive, suddenly they're a hero. It's not that society hates intelligence, it hates what intelligence forces us to confront. Because real intelligence doesn't just bring answers, it brings uncomfortable questions. Questions about the systems we obey, the beliefs we inherited, and the roles we're expected to play. And most people, they'd rather feel safe than right. So the deep thinkers, the visionaries, the truth tellers, they're often ignored, mocked, or erased until it's too late to matter. Then, and only then, we frame their quotes, celebrate their lives, and pretend we would have stood beside them all along. But if they were alive today, they'd still be outsiders. And that's the paradox of being ahead of your time. Now here's the part most intellectuals ignore. Knowing truth isn't enough. Knowing when to share it is survival. See, Schopenhauer understood something most thinkers miss. You're not meant to scream wisdom into every room. You're meant to choose your rooms. Let's be real, trying to explain depth to people addicted to noise. It's like handing poetry to a thunderstorm, so don't chase the crowd. Don't water yourself down just to be understood. Instead, choose solitude, not as a punishment, but as a strategy. Because solitude isn't loneliness. It's protection, it's clarity, it's power. And when you do speak like Franklin did, with humility, like Feynman, with simplicity, like Ada Lovelace, who created spaces where minds could collide, not compete. They knew something critical. Intelligence doesn't have to isolate, it just has to be shared wisely. You don't need everyone to get you, you just need the right few, and they're out there, trust me. Before we wrap this up, I need you to hear something. You've probably spent years wondering if there's something wrong with you. Why you feel out of sync, why people pull away when you speak from the soul, why you constantly feel like you're too much. But the truth? Deep thinkers aren't rejected because they're wrong, they're rejected because they're right too soon. It's not that you're too complicated, it's that most people haven't gotten there yet, and that can hurt deeply. Because being ahead of your time comes with a cost. You often walk alone. But here's what most people won't tell you. You were never too deep. They were just too shallow to swim where you are. Let that land. Because the world, it desperately needs minds like yours, not watered down, not silenced, not bent to fit in. Even if it's not ready to say thank you yet, even if it never gives you the credit you deserve, you must keep thinking, keep questioning, keep searching, because you're not crazy. You're not broken. You're not too much. You are not alone. You are simply awake. And in a world that's asleep at the wheel, that makes you rare. That makes you essential. Now I want to hear from you, directly. Have you ever been rejected for thinking too deeply, for asking the questions no one wanted to answer, for seeing what others chose to ignore? Share your story. Not for attention, but for connection. Because someone out there is carrying the same silence you've been carrying, and your voice might be the one that makes them feel seen. Let's start the kind of conversation most people are too afraid to have. Not surface level, not sugar-coated, but real, raw, honest. And if you've felt that isolation, that quiet kind of courage, drop a comment right now that says, "Today, I'm ready to be alone," if that's what it takes to stay true. If this hit home, like this video, subscribe for more truth most people won't say out loud, and send this to someone who's always been told, "You think too much." That's not a flaw, that's your gift. And you don't need to shrink it to belong, we're just getting started.